Paul, thank you very much for agreeing to do this. One of the things we've tried to do each year at this conference is to bring in one seriously high-end thinker and talk to them.
They weren't available, so I'm here.
So we had Vinod Khosla with us year one, and we had the former CEO of Cisco with us last year. And they were both interesting conversations. But I think this one will be a little bit more interesting because we're not just talking of the here and now.
Thanks for overselling me.
And that's part of my job, by the way, right now. And I'm not going to introduce Paul for the folks who don't know. You should not be in this room, actually.
Well, no.
So
let's dive in. Yeah.
So regardless, Paul, as you know, is involved both at Stanford in the area of the future, thinking about the future. And at Singularity, he chairs the department which is focused on Paul, people have talked of futurist, futurologist, but you say that that's not what I am. And what does it actually mean? Why and how do you differ from what other people who talk about the future? Do you think they're trying to predict the future differently from you? Or are they trying to drive the future itself?
I have tried without much success to be called a forecaster for the last 30 years, but I can't seem to shake the term futurist. So you might say at this point I'm a futurist with a past. I think you have to distinguish between people who are trying to identify what lies ahead and people who are trying to tell you what lies ahead and they think should lie ahead. So visionaries are people who say, this is the future we should head into, and Lord knows we need them. My job is being something more of a bystander, saying what are the full range of possibilities that the future might hold, and what are the steps we can take to go to a preferred future or another.
So the other reason this becomes important for us is India is at a very interesting point in its history right now. This was a country, if I go back in history, which was amongst the leading nations in the world, and I'm going way back in history. Probably the first country in the world which started liberal arts education. It was pretty advanced in science. It was also the first country where men and women were educated together. We had students from 32 countries who were studying in India. But we kind of fell behind. And right now we're saying, let's leapfrog and use technology to help us do that. We have 1 billion phone connections. We have 1 billion digital identities, only place in the world. Of course, there are not many with billion plus people. And we also have 1 billion plus bank accounts. So it's a very interesting combination of what we think the possibilities are, the ability to provide government services. We are also the only country in the world, by the way, which is able to transfer money at no cost through a program called the UPI. And so do you think this is the right direction for a country like India? Or do you think there's something else which needs to come into the mix or that we need to be cautious of?
Well, I'd start by observing that it's been an interesting moment for India at every moment in the last 4,000 years.
7,000 actually, but that's all right.
Yes, sorry.
Give or take a few thousand.
It's here a few thousand. Yeah. I think the temptation for a country like India is to seize on the latest innovations, particularly because your country with so many innovators. And I actually don't think that's India's greatest contribution. It has been said that India is a civilization posing as a country. And I think that India needs to engage in more civilizational thinking. I've been professionally in Silicon Valley for several decades and live and breathe innovation. My class next quarter at Stanford in the engineering school is titled Foresight for Innovators. I think innovation thinking can only take us so far. And there's no shortage of innovation thinking on the planet today, but there is a shortage of civilizational thinking. And there are not a lot of places that can do that. I come from a very young country called the United States, and we certainly don't think like a civilization. The unique contribution of the Indian subcontinent and also China is, as the oldest cultures on the planet, is to help us think in larger ways. innovation creates opportunities, but also innovation has gotten us into some very serious trouble. And we are not going to be able to innovate our way out of the problems that we're facing today.
I actually completely agree with you, by the way. And you are known as one of the premier thinkers about the future in the world today. But it's important for us to also focus on where we come from. And India, in some sense, has that big advantage in the world. You know, when we started the Indian School of Business, which is now India's leading business school, so one of the questions we were asking ourselves is, what is it that you will offer which is uniquely Indian? Because this could be a business school anywhere in the world. And so we started a program called Mind, Body, and Soul to offer people a uniquely Indian experience. And it's run off and on. It's kind of sputtered a little bit because too many of us, I think, are chasing the same dream of creating a cookie cutter model of development which is taking place in what are known as the developed nations. We do have an opportunity at this moment, and I'm not sure we're doing enough. I had a conversation actually with the South Asia arts department here only last evening to talk about some of this, is how do we ensure that while we are moving forward with technology, we don't lose sight of the big foundation that we have, the philosophical foundation that we come from. So how do you think it's possible for us to create this mix at this moment? Because we are, as the rest of the world is, we are now known as the second largest startup nation in the world.
Well, I mean, first of all, education is a really important place to pick up on these challenges. It was Will and Ariel Durant who wrote 50 years ago that civilization is a race between education and catastrophe. And at moments, I feel like my particular country has unilaterally disarmed in this regard. Take Berkeley here. It is absolutely shocking how few resources are given to Berkeley, which has the misfortune of being a state-run institution. I think the short answer is, we had a good example at the United Nations just a few days ago, a speech by a young woman that my hope is with youth. And I think it will be youth that touches on deep culture and history. The danger for India, I was just thinking about this driving over. One of my first visits to India was in December 1992. Does anybody remember December 6, 1992?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I thought, gosh, I was heading out to the airport, and I thought, why is everybody out in the street in the middle of midnight on Saturday night? Does this happen every weekend in India? You can use, history can be a really powerful platform to stand on and look at the future, or it can be a jail. It can be a trap. And if you take the wrong lessons from history, and I'm not talking about India specifically.
Sure.
India has the good fortune to have enough history to have this dilemma, but you have to use history in the right way.
Yeah. So you're an often quoted individual. One of the things they say, as you've said, is that we come onto the earth to, in a sense, have a good time, be useful, tell stories, and collect stuff.
Yeah, so I probably will never live this down, but what I had said was that it seems like three things motivate people.
I added the fourth one,
and I'm sure there's a fourth, but I can't, so you're going to tell me what the fourth is.
Yeah.
The three things are to be useful, to tell each other stories, and to collect junk, and which completely explains eBay. But if you think about it, it really is sort of it.
So what is it you collect?
So who here has too much junk at home? Good. Okay.
I guess everybody.
Let me warn those who don't. I say this myself: don't collect stuff, because getting rid of it is so much harder than getting it. I accidentally put together a small but pretty significant collection of navigational and surveying instruments, and back to original Ramsden sextant and stuff. And I had the good fortune that I chaired the library visitors board at Stanford, and we have a marvelous map center called the Rumsey Digital Map Center. It's got just a little over 500,000 historic maps,
wow.
And more importantly, This stuff is all online in such high resolution that you really don't need to see the physical maps. I recommend if you ever want, have a couple hours to kill, go visit the Rumsey Map Center site on the web. Anyway, long story short, we decided that they needed a little more than just those dusty old paper maps. And so I managed to unload my entire collection of navigational instruments to the Rumsey Map Center where people can go look at them. And best of all, I don't have to trip over them at my house.
But you're right. And at home, we made this understanding amongst ourselves. We were buying too many things. So I said, every time you buy a shirt, you must give one away. And there are plenty of places in India where you can give them away. But I found we were only doing that for clothes. We were not doing for the handbags the ladies in the house are buying, and we're not doing for the rest of the stuff. And it does pile up. I want to come back a little bit to the current wave of technology. On one sense, you can say there's a wall of technology coming at us. But then it's just been different technologies at different times. Why does today seem to be different?
Today's different because of acceleration and because of exponential phenomena. So you all are very familiar with Moore's law that every 18 to 24 months, the density of transistors on a chip doubles.
Is it even relevant right now? Are we moving faster than that?
Well, there's a big debate whether Moore's law is slowing. In fact, at moments, I feel like the number of people who say Moore's law is slowing is itself growing exponentially. But there's an additional dimension to this phenomena that's not just about density and cost and speed. And it makes that whole question of whether Moore's law is slowing down or not quite irrelevant. And that is the number of transistors being produced. So in December 1948, we had precisely one transistor. Today, we are producing, I was just running the numbers earlier this week, getting ready for my students. It's a very odd thing. This is the definition of middle age. I own a house in Silicon Valley that I could not afford to buy at market prices. And I'm a professor at a university that most assuredly would not admit me again as a student. And I have that sense that when I walk into the room, I am the dumbest person in the room, so I try and prepare. Think about the volume of transistors produced. We're producing today, so I may have this off by a magnitude, but we're producing about 20 trillion transistors per second on the planet.
Wow.
So to give you a sense of scale, that is, take all the grains of wheat and all the grains of rice produced on this planet per year. Wow. And it is less than the number of transistors we are producing in a minute.
Wow.
Every 8 hours, we are producing more transistors on this planet than all the grains of rice and all the grains of wheat ever produced in the history of humankind. And it is doubling. So it doesn't matter how fast the chips are when the chips themselves are proliferating at that kind of rate. And it means that every 12 months, we're in a fundamentally different world.
So, of course, you're absolutely right. In some sense, what they used to say was the entire moon mission had less computing power than I have in my phone right now.
Actually, it had a whole lot less than that.
Exactly.
Yeah, no. Who here does anybody ever buy, who here had a student graduate recently? And so some of you may have bought one of those cards that, sings the little song, da, 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 da.
Yeah.
Well, you buy that card and you open the card and you play the tune and you throw it out, right? The chip in that card has 50 times the processing power that was on board the Apollo command module. So we live in a world of disposable computers, and I don't just mean Microsoft Windows.
Yeah. So I want to go to a specific area which is much under discussion around the world, which is clean transportation. Clean fuels, battery-powered cars, autonomous, safer or not safer. Is this the right direction, do you think? Or will graphene come and change everything? Will hydrogen fuel cells actually become viable in a smaller size? Where do you think we are going in transportation? Or is it going to be completely different from what we expect right now?
Well, the important thing is we have broken the monopoly of ICE. ICE being internal combustion engines.
Yep.
And we've broken that very rapidly. You know, it was, I'm showing my age here, but in the first Arab oil embargo.
70s, early 70s,
yes, you may recall Sheikh Yamani's famous quip about the end of the oil age. He said, you know, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. And similarly, the oil age is not ending because we're running out of oil. It's because we realized that it's, you know, thermodynamically just ridiculous. Oil is just congealed sunlight, 200 million year old sunlight. So it makes so much more sense to go straight to electrons. And then the details of how the electrons work. Innovation is a conversation, and it's a conversation among innovators. Around 1900, there was an argument among the innovators at the time of what cars would be. Edison said, well, of course we should use electrons. And Henry Ford initially said, well, we should use ethanol. And then the Lucas Gusher came in 1906. He said, I think I'll do oil. So that debate's happening today about the details. The details really don't matter at this point, as long as we can get to electrons as quickly as possible.
So I want to switch to a slightly different subject. It's somewhat linked, but different. Overall energy use in the world, water and food. I think the linkage often gets missed because, to the point you made, rice is nothing but water converted to food. So is sugar. Sugar cane is actually
my favorite in the United States is corn is nothing but oil converted to corn.
Exactly.
And so now it's typical American logic. We take oil, we turn it into corn, which we turn into ethanol to put into our cars, and it has a lower energy density than oil. Only Washington could come up with such a model.
So in some sense, water appears to be the world's largest under-addressed problem at this moment. Do you think at some point this conversation about water will get heightened to the same point that air pollution and emissions have become now?
You know, it'll get heightened when it becomes too late. And your neighbor to the north is the one with the most serious water problem. That China's got a chronic shortage of water, made all the worse by the fact that they've been polluting their aquifers. So, you know, and which is not good news for you all because they're going to take the entire Himalayan snowpack. The real problem with all of these things, we've known the water problem's been coming for a long time. We've also known the climate change issue has been an issue for a long time. It was Svante Arrhenius in 1896 who did the math and said, oh, if we double the amount of atmospheric carbon, you know, we're in big trouble. And we've known it since then. We didn't really get the issue in the news till the mid-1970s. What has happened here is not a failure of foresight, it's a failure of imagination.
Is there a substitute for water that we could imagine? Is there any work going on at all, anywhere?
No. I mean, water as a molecule is a really weird substance. You know, that the planetary biologists keep talking about other life forms based on other things. Water is such a weird substance. It's one of the few things, for example, how many people have ever made the mistake of putting a bottle of water in your freezer and it explodes?
At some point, everyone's done it, I guess.
Most substances don't do that. They shrink. And it turns out that's a key part of why water works for life.